So here we are, sharing secrets of the soil with me, your host, Regen Ray. Hello, soil lovers, and welcome to another episode of Secrets of the Soil. I'm your host, Regen Ray, and today I'm excited to have a yarn about soil and health and nutrition with my good buddy from Melbourne, Matty. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ray. How you doing?
I'm pretty good. This has been a quite eventful day, and I'm loving these podcasts because they always fill up my cup, and I'm excited to chat to you about food, nutrition, weight loss, and health, especially because this episode is going to land at the new year. Share with our soul lovers a little bit about who you are and how you got into the food and nutrition space.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Matty. I was a cancer research scientist, or I was a part of a cancer research team for many years, and I'm working in that world and seeing many unwell people and learning from the inside how hospitals work and how medicine works. And it just really motivated me sort of unintentionally to want to help people in a way that I don't feel that modern medicine did help people. And what I mean by that is that very few people walk through the door of a cancer hospital and leave cured, well, and, ready for the next chapter of their life. And so I also grew up in a country town with my mum as a nurse. When I was very little, we were on a farm when I was really little. So I grew up around, the wilderness and that type of thing. So, and my mum, whilst being a nurse, also used to take us to a lot of holistic health practitioners as kids. So I always had this blend of the worlds without even really realizing it. So yeah, I grew up, moved to the city, worked in the hospital, and learnt this about working there, just that not many people get well. And so for me, I was like, okay, 80% of people in clinic, I walk through clinic every day, approximately 80% of people are visibly overweight. So maybe we need to deal with that issue. So then that kind of motivated me to be like, okay, we need to help people lose weight because being overweight is the biggest precursor to cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, all of these sort of modern diseases that are proliferating everywhere now. And so I did that. And then I learned that pretty much everybody knew what to eat already. I've had the good fortune to speak all over the world in lots of different countries and retreats and wellness events and conferences. And then I was like, if everybody knows what to eat, why aren't they? And that's kind of where I spend most of my time now. It's really in that mindset of health and wellness because, a lot of people know, generally speaking, that meat and vegetables, fruits, nuts and seeds are pretty good. And I haven't met somebody that thought chocolate for breakfast was a good idea. So I kind of arrived at like, well, there's obviously a problem with the behavior change step and the mindset around health and wellness and doing what's good for me. And so that's kind of the journey that I took. And I just wanted to be able to help people because I didn't feel like I was helping many people being a part of the cancer hospital.
Excellent. And I want to congratulate you because it's been 3 minutes and you haven't mentioned that you've got a podcast, and that's rare podcasters.
Well, also... 4 years ago, I started a podcast called How to Not Get Sick and Die. And that's probably been the biggest part of the last 4 or 5 years. It's been tremendously successful. And episode 151, Ray is on that episode. So everybody should check it out.
How do you remember the number? Or did you do your research?
Nope, I'm just crazy.
Okay, good. Excellent. 151. It's funny because those numbers combined equal 7, and that's my favorite number. So if you're into numerology. So yeah, I love your podcast and I get so much wealth of knowledge out of it. You just have a great way of good guests. And I love the fact that you say that you ruin things as well. Like you bust myths and you like make fun things sound bad, but you really shed some light on amazing topics. And you've had some regenerative, farmers and experts as well on the show as well. So how has the food movement kind of overlapped into this kind of food and nutrition? Like what are you seeing as trends with the people you're interviewing and also mentoring?
Well, I think the one thing that's kind of unanimous, irrelevant of what you believe about diet, because I think generally speaking, the carnivores and the vegans, they're all trying to achieve the same outcome, right? So, But what we are seeing sort of unanimously across the board is just the reduction in nutrition in the food, whether it be animal protein or whether it be plants. And therefore, there's sort of two schools of thought. One is, obviously improve the soil, improve farming, improve the food source and the food supply. And then there's the other side, which is kind of more of medical thinking, which is, well, we'll just supplement to fill the gap. basically. But those supplements have to come from somewhere. And inevitably for most supplements, they're not from source, and therefore they're not the exact molecule that they need to be. They're a mimicked version, or what we call an analog, which is like it's approximately the same shaped molecule, but it's not the same shaped molecule.
So when on the packaging they have like equivalent, is that what that equivalent kind of means?
Yeah, exactly. It's a synthetic version of the same thing, which by default means that it's almost impossible to have identical.
Wow. So when buying supplements, even if it is like if you're buying, say, something that is vitamin C and it has equivalent, whatever, 3,000 milligrams, whatever. So that's a synthetic version of vitamin C that's meant to be similar, but not exact.
Yeah, correct. There are some that are more exact than others. And like there are some vitamins like vitamin D, for instance, which come in multiple forms. We need majority of D3, but there are benefits to things like D2. Same with vitamin K1 and K2. We need more of K2 ideally, but we definitely need both of them. But I think in the food supply and the nutrition, we're really seeing the reduction in the amount of these vitamins and minerals that appear in the food. And so the human body's just not getting enough of it. And on the other side of that equation is that we're living in an increasingly toxic world. And so not only are we not getting enough nutrition, but we actually need more nutrition to deal with the toxicity of the world that we live in.
Wow. Unpack that a little bit more. So you're talking about like social media toxicity, like news propaganda stuff, or stress, work-life balance, all of the above?
Yeah, all of the above. So obviously you're talking about a lot of the mind stuff there, but even if we think about the air, you go and walk in a park in a city, most of the parks covered in glyphosate, for instance, right? So just the air is full of toxins. All of our food is in plastic, the microplastics. Even a tea bag has 500 million or several billion, I think, microplastics in one tea bag and one cup of tea. And so these toxins build up in the body and they cause all sorts of problems. It takes a long time for them to accumulate. But because, if we were living in nature, like we were, and I guess farmers are probably the closest people to living in nature, is that we would not really need to deal with much toxicity. There wouldn't be much to detox other than the occasional overconsumption of something. Whereas in the city, we're just constantly bombarded by the water, by the air, by the food supply with all of these toxins, whether it be pesticides and herbicides on the food, whether it be just the loads of fluoride and chlorine in the water, whether it be, the living near airports, and all of the or highways and all of the fumes that are coming out of cars that we're just breathing in, and all the brake dust and that type of thing. So a lot of the nutrition we use and we require, and we hear lots of people advertise detoxes, we really do need to detox many people because we're just so full of the toxins that are in our environment. And therefore, not only do we need good, healthy nutrition in abundance to live, but we also need extra nutrition, extra antioxidants, extra minerals to get all of this excess toxicity that's in the body out. And plus add on to that fake foods that just are made of chemicals and loaded with all these additives, which are not good for the body. Pharmaceutical drugs, many people turn to, tablets and pills very rapidly to deal with any discomfort or pain. All of it just adds to this toxic pile that's in the body. And the nutrition in our food supply is depleting. Our capacity for detox gets lower and lower and lower, and therefore the risk of disease gets higher and higher.
Wow. Now I know why they say Matty ruins everything. You just don't walk in the city before. I thought I was doing a good thing. It's we need to hear this because it's so very true. And it's interesting to hear that whole concept of like, not only are we eating, not only are we eating worse quality food and the nourishment isn't there, we're also like highly inflamed and toxicity and from so many things. And it's kind of burning the candle at both ends very rapidly.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly the case. And we see that in the hospitals, right? Everybody now knows somebody with cancer or knows someone that has died from cancer or knows somebody that's got diabetes. These aren't uncommon things. When I was a kid, and probably many of the listeners are much older than me, like even when I was a kid, I don't remember many people being sick. And if somebody had cancer, it was like a big deal. Everyone was like, oh my God, that person has cancer. Like,
what happened?
Yeah. Yeah, or whatever the disease is, right? And now it's like, I can reel off a list of people that I know have got cancer, I've got diabetes. I mean, I work in this space, but now it's very easy to find, and it's common to the point that most people expect from about 40 or 50, at some point I will get a diagnosis. That's kind of the common belief system now. It's just like, oh, I'll get something. Like, whereas when I was young, it was like that was very rare, and that's evidence of the food system and the levels of toxicity that are in everything. It's finally catching up with us.
So where to from now? Like, what can people do? Obviously, we're very big with the farmer side of things and growing, and we already converted. We know the value and power of soil, but a lot of our listeners don't have access to land or be able to grow their own food. We've got a lot of people living in apartments now. What can people do to get themselves around more nutrient-dense food?
I think the first place to start, and we're very lucky, and I acknowledge that being here in Melbourne, Australia, the first place to start is to get to some kind of farmer's market. I think becoming literate in just the food chain. I think it was in the US possibly a few years ago. There was this kid that they asked, and it's a famous little video on YouTube that a lot of nutritionists know about, where this group of kids were asked where the tomatoes come from and carrots, and the most common answer was the fridge. And so I think the first step for most people is becoming literate in food. And it's interesting too, because for most of human history, in all cultures, like the role of the person who prepares the food is a very important role. And much of the time that is spent by the people in the community or the tribe was looking for food. And now in this really fast-paced, environment that we've got in 2023, we're moving at such a rate that food is an afterthought, even though food is the thing. It's literally the reason you wake up tomorrow, is because you put fuel into the body. And we don't prioritize mealtime anymore. We don't prioritize meal prep anymore. We don't prioritize shopping. And I think that bringing that back as kind of like a sacred practice of like, this time that we allocate to fueling and preparing our body to wake up tomorrow successfully, it's the reason that we exist here on Earth. Without the food, we wouldn't be here. I mean, there's some beliefs that, there's some people in India that are breatharians, but there's not many of us that can be breatharians, So I think we need to bring that back and starting by being like, okay, where does the food come from? I'm going to go to the farmer's market and look at all the different types of vegetables, half of which I've never seen, and just start factoring this practice in. And a lot of people might be like, Matty, I don't have time. People say that for all sorts of things that they need to do. And I think that this is something we really need to bring back, because it used to be a sacred practice. It used to be really important family time for many families, of when everybody connects over the preparation of food, or even shopping day used to be a thing. And I think, bringing this kind of stuff back is step one of becoming food literate.
I couldn't agree with you more. If at the moment, I feel like one of those dogs that sit in the back of the car with their head, the weighted head that's just nodding. Everything is like nodding. It agrees with you to a T. Like, I agree, because coming from an Italian background, that food ceremony kind of love, as food as a love language is definitely key. And there was that preparing and making sure that there was an abundance in the fridge, in the cupboard, and it all came from the yard. It was all grown and seasonal as well. Only eating foods that grew in the season that it was designed to grow with. And I agree, that kind of ritual around food preparation, food is totally an afterthought now. It's like busy day. Oh, it's 8 o'clock. What's open? Where can I grab, those deep pantries, and those, just go into the pantry to see what you can prepare with the ingredients available. Those days are gone. And I think a lot of people have lost that knowledge as well, of like how to whip something up in the kitchen with what they've got. Everything's recipe based, and, I don't have eggs, so can't make that dish. There's no way of substituting anymore.
I totally agree. And I think it's just one of those things, like, we've been taken over by all of the distractions and all of the social media companies and all of the news. Once upon a time when I was a kid, news was at 6 o'clock once a day, and, the rest of the day you got on with your own life. Whereas now, if you subscribe to a news channel, you get breaking, horrifying, devastating news about 300 times a day. And that all of this pulls us away from what is actually truly essential to our happiness, our health, our function. And so I think slowly trying to peel those layers back off that have kind of wrapped themselves around us in this cocoon of like a total disorientation of, which way is up, basically. I think we need to really get back to it. And maybe a lot of people roll their eyes and they're like, Matty, are you moving forward with society? Or are you moving back? And I totally get that there's social evolution and we have to change. But in my eyes, the steps of social evolution that have occurred so far have just caused devastating consequences to human health. And we're got a generation of kids now that are all adults, actually, that are going to expected to live shorter lives than their parents. So to me, it's like, well, sure, we can move forward and live shorter lives, or we can take a few nuggets from the past, 20,000 years of eating and farming and do some good with it.
And not the chicken nuggets, gold nuggets.
Gold nuggets, yes.
Processed chicken nugget stuff. No, I definitely agree with you so much on that. And so you've shared one thing. Is there any other things that people can do when it comes to this food, nutrition, health, and thinking about their well-being?
Yeah, I think the next thing is probably food labels, and then possibly that's the place to start because people go to the supermarket most commonly, right? And even if you don't, you can probably go to your own pantry and start becoming food literate. And what I would suggest doing is just literally, it'll take you less than 10 seconds. Just pick up a jar or anything in a bag, a box or a can, and just start reading. Just make it a practice to start reading and just noting down like how many ingredients are in here, how many of them sound like words a scientist should use, and just start getting familiar with like, oh, whoa, there's a lot of stuff in here. And you'll realize that the foods that are generally on the healthier end of the spectrum will have less ingredients. You'll probably know and recognize many of those ingredients. And the other thing is you'll start becoming more observant of the health claims that they make on a lot of these products, because one of the challenges with food education is that most people get their education from marketing. For instance, the best example that everybody knows is breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And most people think like they're religiously attached to that idea. And the Matty Ruins Everything story around that is that the reason that got put out into society was because in the 1800s, John Harvey Kellogg wanted to sell his cereal. And so in an interview in a newspaper, he once said, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. This was well before he'd made any money. And that got perpetuated because there was very few streams of information back then. And that got perpetuated into mothers and grandmothers and homes. And then, we're like 6 or 7 generations on of mothers handing that to their daughters type thing. And now obviously, everybody just parrots the idea that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And the interesting thing is Kellogg's is arguably the worst thing that you could have for breakfast. Right. It's 100% refined carbohydrates with 0 protein. So it's not the most important meal of the day. I'm not saying the first meal of the day isn't really important. I'm just saying that narrative is not scientifically based or medically based. It's based in marketing. The same when it comes to thinking about preservatives. You might see no preservatives. Usually when they're doing that, they're trying to steer your attention away from the additives. If you see no additives, they're trying to steer your attention away from the preservatives. So you've got to start becoming literate in the way that you've been conditioned or educated to understand food. What do you believe when you just read something in Coles or Woolworths or Walmart, wherever you are listening to this episode? What do you just believe without even thinking or putting through a filter? You might be like, a lot of organic brands are brands. They use the word organic in the brand, not because it's organic. So I think that's maybe step 2.
Yeah, love that example. Natural confectionery company. Nothing natural about it. Full of refined sugars and gums and, but you're right. There is no policing around what you call your company. And that is a big, big problem. And, some people call it greenwashing. But, I like the idea of, bringing the power back to the person in the aisle and having that label literacy, being able to read the packaging and make informed decisions because they're self-educated themselves, because no food industry is going to educate you in this space. They're actually monetized to keep you more confused.
Yes.
And make bad decisions. And like we said, no one would eat chocolate for breakfast. But yet Cocoa Pops or any of those is basically a chocolate bar, probably has more sugar than a chocolate bar, and so very, very crazy that we feel that is an okay world. And I haven't had breakfast for probably the last 5 years, 6 years, ever since I did intermittent fasting and keto and all that. And to me, I feel like, the first meal for me should be around that 12:30, 1:30 kind of window. And you've kind of done some work and you've actually deserving of that and thing. And I also like the fact that you refer to food as fuel. I think that's really important because I feel like we've forgotten that food is a source of energy, and understanding that as an energy point of view from the whole keto, fat as energy and, carbohydrates as energy. People don't even know that there's a difference.
Yeah, well, that's kind of why I arrived at being primarily an emotional eating coach, because we're so incredibly wealthy and privileged in this world to have such an excess of food that it went from being fuel 2 or 3 times a day at full meals to I'm going to manage any discomfort that I have in my entire life with chocolate, ice cream, a walk to the cafe, I'll go grab a coffee and a muffin, I might grab, whatever it is. But we literally manage all discomfort or anything that just feels loneliness, it could be as well, by going and getting some form of sugar or refined carbohydrate. And that's one of the things that I noticed and why I went from just telling people, I guess, what to eat to helping them manage their relationship with food. Because, we've got so much excess that it's gone so far beyond fuel. We use it for love. We use it for connection. We use it for nurture. We use it because we're lonely. We use it because there's a difficult task sitting in front of us on the computer that we don't want to do alone. So we'll go to the kitchen, get some snacks and come back to do the spreadsheet that we didn't really want to do. And it's funny, you break it down like that and it's like, whoa, are we really that weak? I
think every listener is nodding right now.
Yeah, me too. I know how to do all of it because I went through my own journey of understanding that I was eating my emotions and managing all discomfort by just putting food in my face. And the world, the marketing world, the food world, the fast food world is set up in order to monetize that. Like you said, they spend millions of dollars putting people's heads in MRI machines to monitor the dopamine pathways, so your pleasure hormones and your addiction response, in order to how they flavor food. And they do the same thing on social media to make sure they can design these food sources so that you are emotionally eating them. And that once you pop, you don't stop because they hit all of the pleasure centers in your brain and you just keep going back. And you're like, why can't I stop? And they're designed this way. So it's really hard because you got to think that it's kind of me against the world, of all of this manipulative marketing, and they're all trying to make $1. And I don't think capitalism is necessarily the problem, but I think there needs to be more regulation.
So lovers, as you can see, once we pop, we can't stop with this conversation. We're going to take a quick break, but after the break, we're going to keep this conversation going. So stick with us. Hello, soil lovers. I hope you're enjoying today's guest and this podcast, but I wanted to just let you know that when you get excited about soil, just as you're hearing about our guests, then you will want to check out the Soil Learning Center. The Soil Learning Center is a hub that we put together and digitalized all the content over the years that were originally on DVD into this online learning experience. So if any of our guests or any of the topics that we speak about during the podcast whet your appetite and you want to get your hands dirtier and dig deeper and get educated around different things around soil, whether it be biodynamics, permaculture, whether it be using a microscope, or whether it just be hanging out with other like-minded educators, mentors, and facilitators, then the Soil Learning Center is a place for you to hang out and dig deeper. That's the soillearningcenter.com. We have lots of different programs, courses, and even a membership. So if you want to belong to a community of other soil lovers, then that's the place to hang out. Well, until we meet again, enjoy the rest of this podcast. Back to the program. Welcome back, soul lovers. You're hanging out with Regenerate and Matty. We are ruining everything together today, talking about food, health, nutrition. Matty, this is by far one of the most interesting topics at the moment in regards to this dopamine thing. We just touched on it before the break. Why are we constantly in search of this dopamine? I feel like we're in a world where there is so much things we can do for dopamine. Why are we turning to food? Why are we emotionally eating? Do you know? Can you answer that question?
Yeah. No, absolutely I can. So it requires understanding a little bit about evolutionary biology. So if we think about 100 million years ago, whatever your belief system is, whether it was 2,000 years ago, whether it was 1 million years ago, for most 99% of human history, in order to get dopamine, and dopamine is the hormone that's released when you achieve something or you feel good, and you get that positive response and you get that tingle down your spine or get goosebumps, dopamine's being released along with a few other hormones. And so dopamine's the pleasure hormone. It's the hormone that we seek every day to experience in order to it motivates us to move forward and get what we want, because we want that feeling of dopamine. So for 99% of human history, it's required a great amount of risk and effort in order to get dopamine. For instance, food currently gives us dopamine, right? So 10,000 years ago, it was like, okay, I have to possibly be hungry for multiple days. I have to risk my life in a herd of buffalo in order to catch the food and then bring it back. And so there's a huge multiple day risk and delay before you get your dopamine reward. And it's obviously massive when you do it because there's huge risk, big reward. But these days, we don't have to put in any risk whatsoever. And that's just one example, right? Yeah. There's loads of examples of the way that we might have gone about in the past seeking dopamine, whether it be going into a war, a battle, or whether it be, pursuing a man or a woman to procreate, that type of thing. But nowadays, we put in zero risk, zero effort, and zero delay. So our evolutionary brain, which is used to being like, oh, in order to get the pleasure, we've got to put in a lot of effort, a lot of risk. Now it's like, I could go and hunt my food, or I could put in no risk, no effort, and just get it delivered straight into my apartment and basically have it fed to me. And so your dopamine pathway says there's no risk there. There's no risk to our survival. And wow. That's how the brain prioritizes it, because it says, you can either go with a risky option, which threatens the survival of your physical body, or you can remove all possible risk to our survival and get the same result. Wow. So that's why it's so easy to slip into using food as a comfort, or to, social media, all of these different things, because we get these tiny hits of dopamine over and over and over again at absolutely no risk. The catch is, and as we're learning, is that when we do this for a long time, our dopamine center and pathway kind of burns out, and it can cause chronic depression and anxiety, because that risk is essential to feel the reward from the dopamine to feel that reward was earned. Yeah. And after months and if not years of not earning it, you just go down a rabbit hole of depression, because it's like a drug addiction. You get a little bit of dopamine, you get a little bit more, you need more to feel good, and it gets to the point where nothing feels good anymore, and you become numb, you become depressed, you just become kind of like everything feels pointless. So I'm a really big fan of the idea of dopamine fasting. So I don't have any social media apps on my phone. I've got one chat app, and my phone gets turned off at night, doesn't enter the bedroom. And these are all practices of dopamine fasting to start introducing that gap again between the idea of something I want, creating some effort or some space before I get the outcome. And I think that's got real benefits to restoring your sense of control over your life. But it's always going to be tricky, because we're surrounded by marketing and food and all of these things that are trying to hack our dopamine pathways.
Yeah, I love that. I see it as, in the marketing world and business as well, there's all that instant gratification, like everything's now done, delivered to your door. Basically probably Uber's next service is we'll feed you, not just I think that's pretty much getting to that point. And in delayed gratification, we have lost that art of like patience and waiting, and things take time, and and I think that's with everything now. We move into apartments fully furnished, all on finance and all credit cards. My parents and grandparents tell me stories of moving into the house with a bed and a unit. That's it. And then 3 months later, you get the next thing. And then, and things took time, where now it's just like instantly furnished type of thing. And that is applying in everything, food delivered to our door, supermarkets always stocked up.
And we're seeing the consequence of that, both of those stories. We're seeing the destruction of the human body and the shortening of lives, very measurable. And financially, there's a cost to that, right? Recessions happen when everybody lives on borrowed money. So we're just having a recession of our bodies for living on, food that we probably shouldn't be living on.
Yeah, I agreed. And I think we are getting to those crossroads now where hard decisions are being made, and we will have to ride those waves. With your work and the people you work with, how important is soil in the work that you've done, and where like have you how have you gone down this path of realizing that soil is really the start of really good food?
Yeah, I guess for me, it was lucky that I kind of grew up in a country town, around that. And I spent a lot of my childhood up the bush, just riding around and yabbying and, building cubby houses and climbing trees and that type of thing. So I always had kind of a connection to the land in that regard. And I've worked on farms here and there throughout my life. But for me, I really realized, simply because I'm a molecular biologist, so I really understood the microorganisms in the soil and the microbiology aspect as well. And it was just basic maths to me. It was like, if the food is less nutritious, there's a problem with where the food grows. And then you inspect the soil and realize that every generation of food that comes out of the soil takes some of that nutrition. And for me, it was just as simple as that. I was like, oh, we need to heal the soil. Otherwise, the food is just going to be continually less nutritious. And we're going to be encouraged by Big Pharma to supplement it with supplements that their companies own and powders. And then we'll all be on these smoothie diets of Ensure or something like that. And I think that, that ends up in a really dark place, because there's benefit to eating whole, real food. And the amount of times I've said to clients and on my podcast, like, whole, real food, whole, real food, whole, real food. And people say, but the nutrition's getting less. And I'm like, well, eat too. But the answer to that really is the next step, which is we repair the farming and the soil, because the further we go along, in the same way that the human bodies are deteriorating, if we continue to treat cattle this way, each generation of cattle will eventually deteriorate as well, because we'll be so far down the rabbit hole of vaccinating cattle and injecting them with false vitamins and minerals that, again, are synthetic versions of that. We just get so far down that rabbit hole that it's the sick animals feeding sick humans. That just doesn't end well. It's a zero-sum game, basically. So for me, it makes sense, in order to reverse all of this, we've got to start at the beginning of the food supply, which is Mother Nature and Mother Earth.
Love that. That is, I love there's so many words that you use there, healing the soil. And that's something that we talk about a lot. And at the start, when I first got involved in this work, everyone's like, oh, you can't use those touchy-feely words. The farmers wouldn't relate. And it's like, well, something's got to slap them across the face till we wake them up. We can't call it, I got to call a spade a spade. And I do really feel like, healing the soil is the number one thing that we need to do, and realizing that everything is a derivative of that. And so what, I guess, like with the food, soil and so forth, what practices, or how do you get your people you hang out with, and how do you get them bringing that to top of mind? Like, apart from going to the farmers markets, what are some of the better questions that people can be asking to make sure that they're getting food from the right sources?
Yeah, well, when they do go to those farmers markets, talking to farmers, asking about how it's grown, even having plants in your apartment. Even I know that the idea of like regen farming is like plants in the earth, but even step one of like planting, like I've got a garlic plant growing in my kitchen right now, because I grew up in the country, and every time I see my parents, I get a load of homegrown vegetables and fruits. And so I'm really lucky, and often I'm able to plant some of those in pots, but just beginning to understand the process and get literate. And I've got a bunch of friends that live in the city and have got little, veggie gardens out the back. There's co-ops going on in lots of communities these days, and community veggie gardens. So, and even when I worked at the hospital, they had a green thumb group, that we had a veggie garden on the roof of the hospital. So it's becoming more and more common. But obviously, we really want to promote, just getting this conversation going, like having people talk about where their food comes from. And the other thing too is, like, you are it's like that famous Tony Robbins quote, you're the average of the 5 people you spend time with. So if you're around people that are not interested in this stuff and are not talking about it, it's unlikely that you'll be interested in it or talk about it for very long. So attaching yourself to a community of people that share the values that you share is probably a good idea, because then you can proliferate those values and have a positive impact on the earth. So, but I think it all just starts with curious discussion. And that's one of the fantastic things about podcasting, is that anyone in the world can listen to these conversations, and we can all jump on each other's podcast and tap into new audiences. And somebody will take one thing from one conversation and that'll trigger their interest. So I think, communication, education is really important. But also action. Like we can educate ourselves until we're, basically got a library in our brain, but until we actually act, it's just potential sitting there waiting to be used.
As I always say, actions speak louder than words. And you're right, knowledge is a bit of a dangerous thing as well, because we can get caught in that wheel of like constantly learning.
Yeah.
And someone shared a concept with me the other day where it's like, if someone had a sword and they kept sharpening it, there'll become a point that when they need to use it, there'll be only the handle left.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can over sharpen something, to the point where you actually wear it out. And maybe, people who are addicted to that learning phase, which I'm a big fan of, but there's a point where you need to move that knowledge, into experience. And even if it is in your backyard or on a balcony or even in pots, even if it's not connected to the soil and the earth's vibration, then something is better than nothing. And I'm a big believer that it starts in your own backyard,
Yeah, no, I feel exactly the same. And even like just going to friends' houses that might have backyards and dirt and that type of thing, and just getting familiar with like, oh, how does this all happen? And some people might obviously have no interest, and that's okay. We can't all be into it, but we all eat. And I think caring about the stuff that goes in your face is your responsibility. And if you don't, well, then you get to be a victim to a marketing company and usually end up sick. So taking responsibility, at least for the food piece. And as consumers, if you're taking responsibility for the food piece, then that's where I think the rubber hits the road for things like regen farming, because we can educate all the farmers in the world, but they're all businessmen and they're not going to make decisions that don't make financial sense. You might get the odd one that's got enough money in the savings account to take a big risk and be a pioneer in the space, but unless there's a market of people asking for it, it's very unlikely many people will pick up on it. And so I think that's why I think as a nutritionist, my role comes into that space of educating people and getting you on my podcast and into my communities to educate people on why looking for nutrient-dense, regenerative food is important, and that will start the buying cycle, which will then tell farmers that there's some viable business option here in order to get into this space.
Yeah, hands down, 100%. It is definitely a grassroots movement. It's one of the things we've worked hard with, as much as it's important to educate the farmers to change their practices or their values to align more with the regenerative. If people aren't knocking on the supermarket doors saying we demand better quality food, and asking better questions, going in your restaurants and saying, well, do you know where this steak came from? And if they don't know, that plants the seed for that restaurant owner to go, why don't I know that? Maybe I should know for the next time the customer asks that question. And the more that we all go into these spaces and ask better quality questions and put the pressure back on the system, that will flow upstream. And then when the demand, marketing, supply versus demand, when the demand is there, the supply will show up,
Yeah. I think that's a really good suggestion about going into restaurants as well. Asking those questions, because there's a few restaurants here in Melbourne that boast on their menus the kind of farms that they get their food from. They get their raw materials from. So I think it's the same thing. Like restaurant owners are consumers in the same way we are. So if we can put some pressure on them by just getting curious and asking those questions, and then moving towards the sort of more, I guess, honest or open and proud restaurants that say, hey, we get our stuff from this farm, being like, oh, that's amazing. I know that, I've heard of that farm, or I know that that's a regen farm or biodynamic or organic or whatever it is. It's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the guests on the podcast that would have appeared before this show, but not out yet. So I can't give you an episode number, but they run a restaurant here in Sydney called the Blue Door. And he spoke about the fact that there are so many chefs that spend a lot of time making a tomato taste like a tomato, using gums to thicken it, acid, acidic. It's like, we're working so hard. Why don't we just use really good quality tomatoes? And that just blew my mind. You hear that on the podcast if you listen, but what you're saying is exactly right. But we need to put those pressures on the systems to, I remember times where you'd go to a restaurant and be like, grain-fed beef. Like, I couldn't think of anything worse right now. Like, cattle are not designed to eat grain. Like, why we put that on menus and thought it was good, I have no idea where that kind of trickery came from. And there's a big difference between grass raised and grass finished. Again, becoming used to the literacy and the words and the trickery. And I think that's another world. But I think as people go into these places and ask questions and put people on the spot, who cares if they don't know? And if you want, walk out if they don't know. But I'm not saying you have to do that, because I feel like every business needs to have an opportunity to transition. Yeah. But asking those better quality questions is definitely a good starting point.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I like that you said that about businesses, because I think in some of these movements, you can get banished for not ticking all of the boxes straight away. And, everyone's on their own journey. And if we're all kind of moving in the same direction, I think that's better than, judging people harshly and maybe having them leave the movement.
Yeah, I agree. I think everyone needs to be given an opportunity to, find what they want to do and discover it. And, we can't just wake up and legislate thing overnight. And I hate when people say, oh, we need to make it law and we need to ban this. It's like, no, it will slowly fade away if we just stop buying it. If you have a problem with something, stop buying it. We vote with our dollars and whatever they're worth these days. to finish them by the hour. Oh gosh, yeah. So I definitely think that we have a lot more power. And I think that's what we've also lost as well as human beings, is how much power we do have as a collective commons, that we can really help steer the ship into the direction that we want.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the challenging things about social media. And there's lots of positives to social media. Like, lots of people will probably hear this conversation as a result of social media, but it's also it was meant to make us feel more connected, but it's really made us feel more individual and disconnected. Like, we've got our own little world. And so we've got this artificial sense of being connected to the greater community. And I think it's kind of like where we started, really. It's, bringing back that community and that in real life experience of, actually, we're a huge group of people that can have a positive impact and make a difference. And it's like, if you look through every revolution in history, most people think you need more than 50%. Every revolution that ever happened was like, here's an example. So the Coca-Cola movement, when they got rid of cocaine out of Coca-Cola, it was 20,000 women marched on Parliament in order to campaign for that and got it to happen. And that's a huge victory in the food and drink space, obviously, because people aren't doing drugs every time they crack a can of Coke. But the interesting thing is that originally the scientist that was heading that movement up, he realized he couldn't do it from the inside. He was just being shut down by businesses left, right, and center. So what he did is he went and applied for a job at a women's magazine and thought, I'm just going to talk direct to the consumers, educate them. And he did that over a period of months or years. I forget how long. And he managed to get 20,000 women so fired up that he got them all to the steps of Parliament House in the US in order to campaign against it. And that is nowhere near 50%. It's probably 0.1% of Coke consumers, right? So there's also this illusion we need a huge number of people. But I think reminding ourselves that, one, the number doesn't need to be as big as we think. And two, the people that do show up, we're all in it together. I think that's really important.
Yeah, 100%. I that's quite interesting. I didn't know he went and signed up at a magazine because we talk about some media outlets being owned by sketchy people these days and what message is kind of pushed through or curated or censored. So that's in a way that's kind of an early form of like getting in and spreading the message, but with a positive outcome.
Yeah.
And so what's your experience with the links between soil biology and gut biology? Are you seeing much research from a scientific point of view? Is that area being funded, or are we still in that point of it's underfunded?
Yeah, I definitely think there's links. And I would say that the most worrying thing, at least to date in my experience, which is limited in the sense that everybody's is simply that the foods that we have consumed, like the Franken foods, the not real foods, everything in a bag, a box, or a can, is that they're decimating microbiomes. Like, so what we've got foods that don't have all of the things that they need. And if you pick something in the wild, for instance, or on a farm that hasn't been totally smashed with different chemicals, is that plant will naturally have bacteria on it, because all living things are covered in bacteria. Humans are covered in bacteria in our mouth, in our gut, everywhere. Same with food. And so in theory, it should be one bacterial environment meeting another and collaborating and producing, whatever it produces, a healthy outcome, ideally. And so we're seeing the consumption of not real food decimating gut populations. So like a healthy microbiome should have somewhere between 500 and 1,000 different bacterial colonies. And on average these days, we're seeing 300 and below. And so what that means is that when we do put foods in that we should be able to digest, we're not able to digest them because we've got all of these species that previously helped digest those foods. And so we're seeing a rise in intolerances. Lots of people are unable to eat different types of food and different types of ingredients. And it's not necessarily because they've just got bad luck with their gut health. It's often because they spent several years or decades decimating the populations that tried really hard to stay alive in their microbiome. And then we introduce these healthy foods. And I see it all the time. People that want to shift their diet and they make this change and they get bloating, they get pain from healthy whole real food. And it's because that gut microbiome has been decimated. And I think the bridge to that, so there's some microbiome species that can't be reproduced again. So we want to turn the ship around as soon as we can. But one of the best foods to bridge this gap is fermented foods. So, the sauerkraut, kimchi, these types of foods in order to introduce bacterial species back into the gut. But the less and less diverse the soil becomes in its microbiome, then the same with the plant that we then eat. And then ours is reduced in its biodiversity as well. And it's just this self-fulfilling cycle that everything's less. And then obviously we go to the toilet, and then the stuff that we're putting out of our bodies has got less biodiversity in it as well. The same with the cattle on farms that's fueling obviously a lot of the ground that we then grow crops in. If they're eating really limited diets like just grain that's gone through a factory and been wrapped in plastic, then the defecation that they have is not very biodiverse either. And so it's just this never-ending cycle. So I think, the biodiversity of our microbiomes and the microbiomes of the planet is really important. And I guess, as you and the listeners probably already know, the first step in the right direction for that is to begin farming multiple things in the same soil rather than depleting the same soil year over year over year with the exact same crop.
100%. Yes. 100%. You just articulated that so well. Do you want a job in the regenerative space?
I'll be a spokesman.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think, that is exactly right. It is a downward spiral is the way that I can only explain it, because it kind of doesn't go back to the way it was. It's actually lower. And so every time it goes around in that cycle, it's a spiral that's kind of getting lower and lower and lower. But you're right, we can reverse that. I didn't know that there was gut biome that wasn't repairable. So that didn't dawn on me until you mentioned that. And I think that's really important to know, because once it's gone, it's gone. If we can't, reignite and inoculate that in our gut biome, that's quite long-term effects. And you mentioned before about when you're younger that, there wasn't a lot of these things around, like allergies, is one of those other things where it's like no one at school, when I was going to school, had any allergy. We just ate whatever we want, didn't have to worry about any of this. And now all of a sudden there's all these things that people are allergic to. And I do feel that it's around that whole biology in the soil, in our gut. And it's also not because of just the foods we're eating, but the sterile environments that we're kind of raised in now. Yes, this is dirty, that's germy, that's yucky, take that out of your hand, out of your mouth. Like when you watch a baby, the first thing they do is they put things in their mouth and they're trying to feed that biology in their world, which is in their internal. And we break those cycles and we tell people that that's bad and stop doing that. And I feel like we've kind of lost our way to some degree of helping people become really resilient humans.
Oh, well, and it's common for anyone that's got kids, and particularly mums, that it's common knowledge, and it was common knowledge throughout the pandemic between health professionals to know, in a few years, we're going to see a massive explosion of autoimmune disease because everyone was sterilizing their hands 25 times a day. And if you've got a newborn, there's always that mum that's cleaning their kid over and over and over again. And everybody knows like that kid is going to have allergies because what this microbiome is meant to be a part of the defense system of the body. And if you perpetually kill it, it has to keep starting from zero. And if it keeps starting from zero, it never learns anything about its environment. It never matures. The cells never go beyond generation 1 cells. And so we've got this really, really naive layer of immunity over these people that have just been consistently cleaning themselves. And so I had this discussion lots of times throughout the pandemic, just knowing that 5 or 10 years, we're going to see a big explosion in adults because of all of the hand cleaning that went on in that time. Now, I'm not debating whether that should or shouldn't have happened, happen, but it will be a consequence of extreme sterility.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. Very interesting. I think the same of like, wearing the masks and, these kids that didn't see facial expressions or smiles. Who knows how to track that? That's a 20-year study, maybe as a minimum. What happens to the psychology of humans based on the fact that their first 2 years of alive was, emotionless to some degree, no smiles, no, seeing people with no facial expression. So it's hard to know what that's going to do. And the same with the whole sanitizing movement, keeping everyone in this real sterile, same air circulated kind of thing with like being in the same room. It's going to be very interesting. I do worry that won't get funded. None of that research will get funded. It will be just swept under the rug to some degree. So
yeah, totally. Well, and then like, thinking of those poor kids that haven't seen facial expressions, don't know how to communicate correctly because they can't see people articulate their letters and their words and their, emotions. That generation of kids is going to be really lost and possibly, given less opportunities and miss out on all of these things because of just some core human things that they missed out on in this chapter. And hopefully that doesn't lead to a permanent change in all kids that come from now on. It's really scary. I hope those kids get what they need, because there's absolutely consequences to not being able to, for babies and kids to be able to see faces.
Yeah. Well, I kind of often said in this space is maybe eye movements will become like their weapon. They just know sense someone's emotion based on eye movements, which we don't. So I think there'll be something else that fills that gap. But there's always a pro and con, and that's but support during that is everything. Matty, are you ready to become the voice of our soils?
Let's give it a go.
Yay! Excellent. So you have embodied the soil. You are now, in the field. You've got cows on you. You've got grass. You've got a mouth. What will you say to us 8 billion people on the planet?
I would say I need diversity. I need a bit of everything. I'm sick of eating the same thing all of the time. I'm deficient and I need some love and attention. So give me all of the things that you can give me that are whole real food. Bring whole real food back to me, not bag, a box, or a can things.
Love it. I think that's a really important thing, is that biodiversity. One of the main core principles of regenerative agriculture is that whole ability to have biodiversity. And it's not just plants and bugs. That's one of the things I'm trying to show people, is that biodiversity also means people. Biodiversity of people. You mentioned before, you're the average of the people you hang around with. Our soul lovers are hanging out with us right now. They got us right in their earbuds. We're hanging out and we're hopefully lifting that vibration and that knowledge and that experience, and feeding the soils biodiversity. Imagine if you woke up and ate the same chocolate bar every day and that's it, or bug smoothie every day for the rest of life. It would get very boring.
So boring. It would be incredibly boring. Well, and the other thing is that you kind of touched on there is humans with their bare feet and their bare bodies rolling around in the grass, walking on the dirt. Like, part of my morning routine is a barefoot walk. And I walk every day, because not only does the biodiversity of the soil come from plants, but it also, like you said, comes from humans. And we also inoculate our own microbiome from breathing in the air of different environments. So mixing nature and human skin on the earth, I think, is a really important thing.
Mate, that's exactly what Zach Bush said the other day when I was in a room with him, and he literally hugged 350 people that were in the room, because he's like, I want the biome of every single person to come in contact with me, because that'll help me become a better human tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just thought that is, and he spoke about going into different environments, breathing in the air from rural, regional, different cultures, different parts of the world, and picking that all up. And I think it's very, very, we do the same path every day to work, from work, same office, same people, same lunch routines. We might change it up day to day, but you zoom out, it's like, God, I've gone to that cafe 17 times this month. That's a majority. So I definitely agree on that. And one thing that you kind of touched on that I think I need to be more conscious about is meal prepping. Getting back in contact with that food, and the whole. I think eating should be the smells and the touch and the whole thing about it. Not just in a bag delivered to the door. Yeah,
well, if we start respecting the time and the process, it's not like we're starving hungry by the time we get to actually put something in our face. It's like, oh, it's time to prepare dinner. I'm not totally hungry yet. And then as you prepare dinner, you start to get hungry because of exactly what you said, the smells and the flavor. And actually, it's really good for gut health and your microbiome because digestion begins with your eyes. Like you trigger the responses in your body. It's just like thinking of food and salivating. So the fact that we skip that step and we just go straight to eating causes all sorts of gut problems. So I think, respecting the space of food preparation and then consumption I think that's so important to moving forward. But who am I? A biased nutritionist.
Matt, you are Matty, and you are the host of the How to Not Get Sick and Die podcast, which has definitely covered a lot of topics that are quite interesting. There's such a diversity, talking about biodiversity, like you go on so many different topics, and it's really, really fun to navigate that, because you touch on some really topics that maybe sit on the fringe a little bit, and a bit, kind of like not mainstream, and you kind of, you jokingly say that you ruin everything, but I think you're really waking people up. This is the harsh reality that we need to hear and go, you think it's ruined because it's not right. There's a gut intuition that says, yeah, you are right, you bastard. Why are you ruining this for me? But you're right, so I think, keep up the great work. And I always love chatting to you. We chat regularly, but it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show and dig a little bit deeper into the wonderful world of soil. Matty, how can the soil lovers hang out with you more?
Yeah, sure. So obviously they can come and hang out on the How to Not Get Sick and Die podcast. So any and all apps. Remember, Ray's episode is number 151. It's amazing. I send it to people all the time when I'm like, here's what regen farming is. MattyLansdown.com. You can hang out there. We've got a Facebook group too for healthy women that are looking to deal with emotional eating, get control of their food. So yeah, come and hang out.
Excellent. Well, Matty, thank you so much for hanging out. It's been real fun. And soil lovers, there you go. We've just had a great conversation unpacking a few things that you can do to make sure that you're a more conscious consumer when you're in the aisle and thinking about your food and nutrition. Thanks, Matty. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ray.
No worries. Soil lovers, until next time, make sure that you get outside, get your hands dirty, keep digging deeper into the wonderful world of soil, and read the back of the labels. Till next time, I'm Regen Ray. I'll see you on the next show. Wait, before you hit the skip button, if you're a soil lover and love listening to my podcast, then I want you to discover more by getting access to my Patreon, where I share behind the scenes and bonus content that doesn't always make the conversations on the podcast. So head over to secretsofthesoil.com/support, where for a very small fee, you get to hang out with me and other soil lovers, where we get to geek out about soil and get access to exclusive content. It's very exclusive. No, not really. It's just a lot of fun and a way that we get to support this podcast together in order so that we can have deeper conversations all about soil from mentors all around the world. So what are you waiting for? Go on, show your support and token appreciation for this podcast. Until next time. Well, soil lovers, that's enough secrets for one episode. I really hope that you enjoyed all the secrets shared during this conversation. But hey, let's not keep it a secret. Please share this podcast around and make sure that you like it and leave us a review, because that really helps spread the secrets of the soil. Until next time, remember, get outside, get your hands dirty, and keep digging deeper into your soils.